Hello, good morning. I'm Katie Lund from the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our second Resilient Connecticut Summit. If you joined us a year ago at Fairfield University in person, then welcome back. And if you're new today, then we're pleased to have you here, and we hope that you will continue engaging with us on this project as it moves forward. I want to be sure and thank all of our speakers today who are here to offer their time and expertise, as well as especially our keynote speaker, Professor Barry Hill, and you'll hear from him shortly. We also have the good fortune of having some remarks from Senator Murphy. So a big thanks to Senator Murphy and his staff for contributing to our day. And this event would not be possible if it weren't for the help of the University Events and Conference Services and Total Webcasting staff. They've been great to work with, and they are here all day to help us as problems that might arise. We have over 250 registrants for the summit today. So finally, a thanks to all of you for participating. We are fortunate to have this many diverse members in our audience, because tackling the challenges of climate change and resiliency requires strong partnerships and engagement, and this is an important step in that process. We have some great content in store for you today, but I'm just going to take a moment to go over a few things. First, a note that the summit is being recorded. We will post the recording, the video recordings on our YouTube page, and we'll send links to all the registrants for all the presentations following the event. And if you are new to this virtual platform, just a note about the platform on the left, you'll notice the program. I'm not going to talk about that in detail, but you can scroll down on the left to see the order of the morning and all the different speakers. You will also notice a tab at the top that says questions. You can use that tab to enter your questions throughout the morning, and our moderators will do their best to answer as many of them as we can in real time. Those questions can also be posed to our technical team that I mentioned is here with us. So if you do have problems with any of the technical aspects of the program, please put those in that question box too. So now it's time to introduce our first speaker. We have the good fortune of having Shanté Hanks, Deputy Commissioner at the Connecticut Department of Housing. She's joining us today, and she has helped us kick off previous Resilient Connecticut events, since this project is being funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, but it's being administered through the Connecticut Department of Housing. So we'll start by hearing from the Deputy Commissioner, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning. What a difference a year makes. Last year, our first summit was held on a rainy autumn day at Fairfield University. Of course, I was looking forward to the coming together in person again for our second annual summit, but I'm delighted to see the commitment to Connecticut resilience by the number of attendees who have joined us virtually this morning. In fact, we have more attendees today virtually joining us than we did last year. This is a testament to our resilience to overcome this pandemic. And change, we know change happens. Sometimes it happens rapidly, and other times it moves oh so slow. On this day in 1985, Microsoft Windows 1.0 was released. Think about how far we have come since then. We're on Windows 10, but it took us 35 years to get to 10. It got me thinking, we have to move faster than that because sea level is rising faster than Microsoft. Last year, I gave an overview of the state of Connecticut's HUD-funded resilience projects that are overseen by the Department of Housing. I am happy to report that despite the health crisis, we have been able to continue our work with the help of our sister agencies, the Department of Transportation and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and with the support of the Connecticut Institute of Resilience and Climate Adaptation. DOH is the lead on the Resilience Bridgeport pilot project, but we could not do this work and make our vision a reality without the help of DOT, DECD, and the City of Bridgeport. These projects will protect affordable housing that is within walking and biking distance of the Metro North train station in downtown Bridgeport. Critical power infrastructure, historical and cultural resources like the Mary and Eliza Freeman houses, which will be celebrating their 200th anniversary next year, and William D. Bishop Development Cottage Historic District, a university, and the historic Seaside Park. Connecticut's National Disaster Resilience Program aims to implement the resilience vision developed as part of the competition process, which again included all of the states and agencies, all the state agencies and councils of government represented here today, of establishing more resilient coastal communities where structures and critical infrastructure in the flood zone are adapted to withstand occasional flooding and protected by healthy buffering ecosystems where critical services, infrastructure, and transport hubs are located on safer, higher ground, and where strong connections exist between the two. As we continue to move Resilient Connecticut forward, keep that vision in mind. We have a great opportunity with Resilient Bridgeport, but there are many vulnerable communities along our coastline. Resilient Connecticut gives us the opportunity we did not have when we were first hit by Hurricane Sandy, to have plans and shovel-ready projects that reflect the best available climate science and align with our state and municipal priorities. I will leave you with this. Also on this day, but just a year ago, in 2019, Oxford Dictionary's word of the day was climate emergency. It is because of the work of all of you, all the attendees here today, that we now have the attention of both the public and policymakers to discuss the state of the earth. I thank you all for joining us today and look forward to hearing your ideas throughout today's session.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Hanks. The Department of Housing has been a great partner on this project and also many others, so we look forward to continue working with you in the future. I'm going to bring Jim O'Donnell, CIRCA's Executive Director and Professor of Marine Sciences here at the University of Connecticut, on stage. Jim is going to provide the second welcome, so thank you, Jim.
Hey, good morning, everyone. It is indeed quite different from a year ago, and I think that's sort of interesting. I thought about that myself for my remarks this morning, but first I want to thank the team that put all this together, the CIRCA team, together with the contractors and the AV support. So all the things are different in many ways from last year. The climate change is going to remain the central problem, I believe, for this country and many other countries in the next decade, maybe even the next 3 or 4 decades. But the lesson I think that we can take from the way we've adapted to the restrictions on travel and meetings today is pretty effective, I hope. You know, we can do things that we've been doing for a long time in a different way. So we're going to have to do a lot more things like this, though, too. So we're trying to do a small part of developing a strategy to help Connecticut think of new ways to do things. And I hope you guys can step back and think about the significance of what we're doing today for a minute before we get back into the details of options and strategies and costs and benefits. The big picture is that this is going to be effective, affecting people generations from now. So finally, I want to thank you for participating today. You know, I hope you can commit as much time as you would have if you had driven for an hour to come to a meeting in Hartford or Bridgeport. Think about the CO2 emissions reductions that you're achieving by doing it this way, and get the best out of it. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim. So before turning it over to our first speaker, John Truscinski, I'm going to share a couple slides with a few other reminders here. So bear with me while I bring my slides up. Sorry about that. Trying to share my screen. Okay. So we had this information on our website, but just in case you missed it, I want to be sure and remind people that the UConn School of Law's Center for Energy and Environmental Law is offering 2 hours of credit, CLE credit for legal practitioners. CL has been a great partner in planning this event, and you can email Luann Cooley to request credit for to verify your attendance. The summit is also eligible for 2.75 hours of CM credit through the Connecticut chapter of the American Planning Association. So we just want to make sure that you're aware of that today. And since we have some interactive Slido polls throughout the day, including John's presentation next, we just want to give you all a chance to test this application with a practice question. So I'm going to bring that up. Let me try and advance the slides here. Okay. So what we're hoping is that you can just practice this Slido poll, and you can access it in one of 3 ways. You can use the QR code on the left. You can go to slido.com and enter the event code that you can see there on the left as well. And perhaps the most easiest is at the top of your program, you'll see a Slido menu where you can enter your choices there. So it looks like some results are coming in. So it looks like this is working, which is great. I'm just going to wait a few moments while more of you have a chance to try it out. A reminder that these breakouts, while you're entering, these 3 different breakouts are all being recorded. So if you don't have a chance to attend one of them and you want to watch later, that will be part of the video recording I mentioned earlier that is going to be posted on our YouTube page. And last year at the summit, we had similar themed breakouts of planning, technical, and a third related to policy, and more specifically climate and public health. So we are trying to continue the continuity of these different breakout sessions in these summits. So, okay, great. It looks like some more results are coming in. And in John's presentation, he's going to have 2 different polls. There are more questions than polls. And in the second breakout session, which is the technical, the technical capacity tools for resilience, focused on a case study in the town of Milford, they're going to use polls as well. So this is great. It does look like most of you at this point are going to be choosing track 1. So John Truscinski is going to be the moderator, and we have a great roundtable as part of that event. Okay, so let's stop there, and we will transition John over to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. John Truscinski is our CIRCA Director of Resilience Planning. A reminder, if you have questions during his presentation, to please use that questions tab. And so after he and David Murphy present, we can answer as many of your questions as possible. So thanks so much. And John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Katie. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As has been mentioned, what a difference a year makes. You know, it seems like a long time ago that we were all in the same room at Fairfield University last year. And, you know, I sincerely hope that at the 3rd annual Resilient Connecticut Summit, we can all be together in the same room again and look back on this, you know, period of disruption and, you know, take away many lessons learned. So with the first part of the morning, I'm just going to take the next few minutes just to give a brief update on the Resilient Connecticut project, and we'll hear from one of our partners in the planning team at Milone and MacBroom as part of this presentation as well. And then we'll get to our keynote speaker. So I'm going to breeze through the first couple of slides, just just to kind of remind folks, how Resilient Connecticut fits into the NDRC program and some of the details. There's a summary video that's available in the tab where you can watch, or download documents during today's event. So if you want more details about the project, you can check it out on our website or check it out there. So again, as a reminder, as Deputy Commissioner Hanks mentioned, Resilient Connecticut is one piece of the state's National Disaster Resilience Program. Resilient Bridgeport is our sister project, a series of pilot projects and demonstration projects in the south end of Bridgeport, a coastal flood defense system, protecting historic affordable housing, a resilience center, among other components. And then Resilient Connecticut, which began as a partnership between state agencies, something that was called the State Agencies Fostering Resilience, or SAFER Council. So really it was about this coordination across different state agencies and in coordination between communities, looking for, looking across Fairfield and New Haven counties and developing a regional climate adaptation strategy. And then also developing forward-looking science-based risk analysis that can be used to support the planning process. And then eventually developing planning implementation plans for specific pilot projects, similar to Resilient Bridgeport. But Resilient Bridgeport is the implementation part of the project. Resilient Connecticut is the planning and regional planning part of the project. So one of our first tasks in phase one of the project was to develop what we called the Resilient Connecticut Planning Framework that included these themes. These are, when we talk about what do we mean by a resilient community, these are some of the themes that, are guiding principles. So first, focusing community development around transit, creating corridors and identifying corridors that by their nature, by their elevation, by the strategies that we plan and deploy are inherently resilient to the impacts of climate change, something we call resilient corridors. Creating opportunities for affordable housing, where affordable housing exists or the potential exists, preserving and enhancing the quality of life in those communities. Developing energy, economic, and social resilience. So, thinking about resilience in terms of not just when there's a major storm and there's a flood which damages structures and houses, but what do we mean by social resilience? What makes a community strong and able to withstand shocks, specifically climate shocks, socially, and thinking about these other definitions of resilience. Increasing transit connectivity, so increasing the connectivity between transit nodes in Fairfield and New Haven counties. Adapting structures and critical infrastructure to withstand occasional flooding, and then really thinking about the role of healthy buffering ecosystems, nature-based solutions, and where we're thinking long-term about moving transport hubs and other critical infrastructure to safer, higher ground. So in terms of the activities that are funded through this project, they fall into 4 buckets. So the first being planning. And right now we're in phase 2 of the planning process, and we'll hear from David Murphy from Milone and MacBroom. He's going to give us a little update about the phase 2 process in a few moments. The technical supporting activities. So this is all the technical support, the development of that science-based risk analysis as part of the planning process, developing a flood risk and vulnerability assessment. We're going to hear from our colleague Yaprak Onat a bit more about that in breakout session 2. And then this, what we call capacity building. So this is largely faculty research teams at the University of Connecticut, and this is really interdisciplinary work. So developing cost benefit, rapid cost benefit assessment modeling, developing policy, legal and policy recommendations. And we're going to hear from our legal fellow, Luann Cooley, along with Joe McDougald in breakout session number 3. And looking at transit-oriented development, et cetera. And we'll hear more about TOD and Dr. Norman Garrick at the University of Connecticut in breakout session 1. And then engagement, what we're doing here. Each year we have the annual summit. We do webinars, and we'll have a number of workshops upcoming in 2021. So there's a number of stakeholders that we're working with on the project. We're working with Connecticut DOH as our project sponsor and pulling the lessons learned from Resilient Bridgeport into our project. As I mentioned, the state agency work group, the Safer Council, is our key advisory group that we meet with quarterly. The Resilient Connecticut Collaborative, which is a broad stakeholder group that my colleague Joanna Wozniak-Brown is going to be leading that effort early in the new year. And then we're working very closely with our metropolitan planning organizations, our MPOs, Naugatuck Valley, West, Metro, and South Central COG, who have been really helping communities to do regional planning, transportation planning, hazard mitigation planning. And we're really working, they're a key partner in pulling all of that data from all of those different planning efforts into what we're doing. So we're not, duplicating efforts, and we're really taking advantage of all the plans that have already been done. And then, as I mentioned, we're working with a consultant team of planners and engineers from Milone, MacBroom, and Dewberry on the phase 2 part of our project. And they are pulling together all of that data, synthesizing a climate vulnerability assessment, and we'll be developing adaptation scenarios with this entire team. So our timeline, very quickly, as I mentioned, we're in phase 2 of the project. The project runs until May of 2022. Phase 3 will start in the late spring and overlap a little bit with phase 2. And phase 3 will be focused on implementation planning for site scale, community scale pilot projects that come out of this process. So with that, I'm gonna shift gears and focus for a few minutes just on the CIRCA-led research and some of the capacity building efforts to develop that science-based forward-looking risk assessment for Connecticut, which is a key piece of the project. And that work, as I mentioned, is being led by our colleague, Yaprak Onat. She's the Assistant Director of Research at CIRCA. And she is really leading a team of scientists and faculty researchers to develop many of these tools and products that you're gonna see. So with that, we're gonna try this polling technology again here. So this is a little question that, based on recent CIRCA research, how much do we expect sea level rise to increase along the coast in Connecticut by 2050? So if you could take a few moments to go to the Slido tab and enter in what you think the answer is. This should be fairly easy if you've been following CIRCA's work in recent years to develop policy for the state of Connecticut. All right, looks like we have a diversity of answers, so that's good, that's interesting. So we'll just give folks a minute to respond. So one of the things we're doing is we're experimenting with different ways to engage remotely, since we can't all be in the same room. Doing this kind of planning, engaging people in this way, we really need to think outside the box. So definitely want to thank Joanna Wozniak-Brown for pushing us to think outside the box with some of this technology. And Slido is one example of a tool that you can use to do this type of engagement. So, all right, so it looks like we have a few different answers. So the answer is 20 inches. So 20 inches by 2050, which if I'm channeling Jim O'Donnell at the moment, I can say that 20 inches is the upper bound of the likely range of what we can expect by 2050, and therefore is a prudent threshold to give communities to plan. Now, while 20 inches might not seem like a lot, I think one of the mantras that you're going to hear over and over through this project is that small changes in mean sea level, small changes in mean temperature actually have an outsized impact on the frequency of flooding and what we actually experience as the impacts of climate change. So one of the first tasks of Yaprock and her team was to develop a new model, a hydrological model of the Long Island Sound. So, really expanding the coverage of where we have data in the Long Island Sound through field measurements and using this program called FVCOM to develop a new Long Island Sound model. So this work was completed over this past year, so all this data is now available. So we now have, for each coastal town on the coast of Connecticut, we have an updated data set of annual exceedance probabilities for different storm surges, as well as wave heights. So, and this is sort of what the data looks like. So on the left, this is comparing between 3 communities on the Connecticut coast. On the left, we have different return periods. So when you hear somebody talk about the 100-year storm, really that's the 1% annual exceedance probability. So we have that information for the 2-year storm, the 3-year storm, and so on for each coastal town. And we also have wave heights as well. So the first tab is the return period, or the first column. The second column is the storm surge height. The third column is the wave height. And again, this is all available now and it can be used to for communities that want to do that planning. And, so one of the interesting things we're able to do now is to start to see, well, what is 20 inches by 2050? What does that actually mean for this data that we have in the Long Island Sound? And so one of the interesting things that we're starting to see, and possibly quite disturbing things that we see, is that, how 20 inches has an outsized effect. So this is an example of a data plot from Milford, Connecticut. So on the x-axis here, this is again the return period. So how often do we see this type of storm surge? And on the y-axis, we have the actual height of the storm surge. And then all these little blue boxes are individual storms. So an individual storm surge, and we can see that towards the left side of this graph, there's a lot of different blue boxes. These are the type of storms that we get on an annual basis or a semi-annual basis, a big nor'easter that causes a storm surge on the coast. And then you'll see towards the right, there's only a few boxes there. So those are the storms that we get every 50 years, every 40, 60 years, 100 years in the data. And so those are much less frequent, but usually higher storm surges. But this yellow or the orange dash line is when we add 20 inches to this data set, and we see, well, if we bring up the level of Long Island Sound 20 inches, how often would we see the type of flooding that we see less frequently? And so the answer is that in the future, what we experience now as the 1% annual chance or the 100-year storm surge is something that's likely to happen much more often. So in this example, we reach the 100-year storm surge level every 5 years by adding 20 inches of sea level rise. And so that has a big impact on the frequency of flooding. So in the places that flood when there's a big storm is going to happen much more frequently as a result of climate change. And so we have map layers now that we're working on and that are also available that can be used, for towns that want to look at the implications of this and update their plans. And what we're also able to do is work with communities. So we've been working with Milford, and breakout session 2 is going to focus a little bit more on this. So bringing in the socioeconomic and other biophysical layers. So where are there vulnerable populations that live that will be impacted by these different climate impacts? And we've been developing this coastal vulnerability index tool and working with Milford and other communities. So Milford is working on updating their plan of conservation and development. So we've been working to test out these tools and really refine them with that community. And this will be available for all communities along the coast that want to do this type of planning. Another example of a tool in the toolkit we've been developing, FEMA's been talking a lot more about this idea of community lifelines. So, not just thinking about one house and raising one house, but, thinking about the different services, the different critical infrastructure that the community relies on. And so what we've been starting to do, again, this is from Milford, is map community lifelines across a city or a region. And then under different assumptions of sea level rise, we're able to see which of the community lifelines will be impacted first, which will be impacted later under higher sea level rise scenarios. So this is a way to start to help communities prioritize the impacts to their community lifelines. All right, so that brings us to our second poll. So we're going to shift gears here, and this might be a little bit more obscure, but based on recent UConn research, by 2050, the number of days that we expect above 90 degrees in Connecticut. So in Connecticut, currently we have about 5 days on average where the temperature across the state is 90 degrees or above. So in the future, by 2050, we expect that number to increase. So the question is, how many days in the future are we going to see this average temperature above 90 degrees? So why don't you go ahead and take a minute to go to the Slido tab and answer the question. And so it looks like we've got a few different guesses here. I'm just going to give folks a minute. Okay, looks like 15 days is in the lead. 25 days in second place. Okay. So the answer is 25 days. So based on this recent work by Angie Seth and the Atmospheric Sciences group at UConn, we expect the number of days by 2050 where the temperature is above 90 degrees to increase times 5 to 25 days. So that has the potential to impact particularly our urban centers, places where we see, based on infrastructure, based on the presence of a lot of impervious surfaces, et cetera, that urban heat island is a real problem. It has an impact on human health, water quality, et cetera. So we've also been working with a team led by Mariana Fragamini from the Landscape Architecture School at UConn to do the same exercise of mapping out. So where are these pockets of heat islands? And then really think about what is the land use influence. So, what is the difference between an IKEA parking lot and a public park where there's a lot of trees in terms of in the same city or the same area where there's an impact of heat. Okay. And then in addition to that, over this past summer, we've been working with the city of New Haven to actually deploy temperature sensors in New Haven so that we can actually start to calibrate. Not only, the previous work is based on satellite imagery and identifying these pockets of heat islands across like a wide scale, but we're also collecting data on the ground for temperature to actually measure the relative humidity and the temperature that residents within the city experience on really hot days in different parts of the city, and really calibrate sort of this land use influence. And I think this will be really valuable work as we help communities to start to adapt to what we expect are increasing temperatures in the coming decades. So a few more notes on some of the other capacity building research. As I mentioned, transit-oriented development. Dr. Norman Garrick at UConn, he's leading a team that's looking at TOD and specifically the obstacles in areas where there's a lot of potential for TOD. We're also doing research with Luann Cooley, our legal fellow, and Professor Joseph McDougald around policy research. Again, that's breakout session number 3, where we're going to have more of a conversation about statewide policy what is the correct policies to help the state become more resilient. So as I mentioned, going back to the planning, so the planning team is led by Milone, MacBroom, and Dewberry, working with CIRCA, working with the 4 COGS metropolitan planning organizations in Fairfield and New Haven counties. So we're going to hear in a minute from David Murphy from Milone and MacBroom to give us an update on where we are with that. Very quickly, just some of the other engagement. As I mentioned, we've been doing a number of webinars, including a climate and public health webinar series that we did back in September. We'll have some upcoming regional workshops in January and April, and I sincerely hope that everybody who is in attendance today will get involved in helping shape this project. And we look forward to that. And then lastly, I just want to say, a few words about, when we started this project, it was before Governor Lamont took office, and, Executive Order 3 of Governor Lamont to create the Governor's Council on Climate Change. So we've been really working hard to coordinate with the GC3, participate in, a couple of different ways. One of which is using Resilient Connecticut as a vehicle to take some of the recommendations from the GC3, pilot them where it makes sense, as well as where there are other groups within GC3 that are doing work that we can use in Resilient Connecticut. We want to use that, and we want those working groups to participate as much as possible in our process. We've been heavily involved in many of the working groups at the GC3, including some of those that are listed there: Financing Resilience Working Group, Science and Technology, Public Health and Safety, et cetera. All right, with that, there may be some questions time for questions at the end of this, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen there and ask David Murphy to join me on stage. And take it away, Dave.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John. And since I have the floor, this is not part of my slides, but I'll say we are looking for the source of the clicking. So if you are hearing a clicking sound, we are looking for it, and we will try to address it hopefully while I'm on. Okay, thanks, John. Thanks, Deputy Commissioner. I will echo some of the things that you said during my couple slides here. I just want to focus on what we are doing on the consultant side during phase 2. And here's kind of a quick overview or high-level overview of our tasks. We have 6 tasks. 2 of them run through the whole phase 2 project. So project administration and stakeholder engagement will be working closely with CIRCA on those 2 items. But if you focus on the bottom part of this slide, tasks 3, 4, 5, and 6, that's where a lot of the planning and technical work is occurring. And so I'll kind of put an arbitrary time axis on this at the bottom, but you can see that task 1 and 2 again run through the whole thing, but we're focusing on tasks 3 and 4 right now, and we'll be moving into tasks 5 and 6 as we move on. Just to kind of orient you, this is our area of focus. The funding is for Fairfield and New Haven counties, and we are looking at all the towns, working with all the towns in those 2 counties and the 4 COGs that cover them. But we also are focusing sort of more intently on the areas that have the TOD potential. So you can see we've highlighted in red the West COG towns, purple is Metro COG, blue is NV COG, and Scrog is the green towns that have TOD potential by virtue of being along rail lines. Okay, so thinking about that scope and then thinking about the towns that we're focusing on, this is kind of a really concise view of what exactly is going on. So we are focusing on the data right now, then moving into what the challenges are, and then turning those challenges on their head and kind of outlining opportunities that we see going forward. And so the tasks, again, have sort of verbose descriptions, and those are underneath the blue boxes. But what it really does come down to is compiling the data to set the stage, identifying the climate challenges, and then identifying the opportunities during phase 2 of this planning process. So how are we doing that? Well, one of the things that you've seen in the past is perhaps you've heard Yaprok talk about the index, which is here visible on the screen. It is primarily geared along the coastal towns, and what we are charged with doing is working with stakeholders, and including the COGs, to change that into a climate index. And so Whereas before, erosion, natural habitat, saltwater intrusion, social and structural vulnerabilities were the focus, we'll be kind of recasting those into flood, wind, and heat related vulnerabilities. We are also working with some tools that have been developed by Peter Minuti's team at UConn on zones of shared risk. So these are areas of land with groups of people who face common challenges, and it can include the buildings, hydrology, ecology, et cetera. So on the left-hand side is a view of New Haven, and on the right-hand side is kind of how we may try to look at some of those zones of shared risk and maybe recasting them a little bit. So they're still primarily the same as what we've inherited, but we're looking at other things like urban heat index and wind hazards and that sort of thing. And so I'm leaving you with just a couple slides on what to think about as we go forward through today and for the next couple months. So think about regional infrastructure challenges and opportunities. And that could be the highways, our rail network, water systems, sewer systems, our friends at Eversource and UI. And then identify resilience corridors and TOD opportunities. Are any of those TOD areas in or near zones of flood risk, or are any new and adapted utilities or infrastructure needed for making these areas more resilient? Think about projects that towns and cities can't address alone. And so I think a lot of you who are out there listening right now have a lot of practice with this because you've been heavily involved over the past couple of years. The Regional Framework for Coastal Resilience is kind of a good example of 10 towns that came together to think about how to address challenges. And then lastly, think about implementable adaptation plans and resilient projects that are with broad co-benefits. And kind of a good example, and I chose an example that's not coastal for a reason, because don't forget about our inland town friends. This is Meriden Green, formerly known as Meriden Hub, an area that was heavily commercialized and impervious, has been turned into a daylighted stream in an area that can flood during rain events. And this is, if you haven't been to Meriden Green, check it out. It's kind of a nice gem in Meriden. So we're going to be looking for more of these in those 31 towns with the TOD potential and other areas as well. And I will see you again in the breakout session if you selected that one, and I'll turn it back over to John.
And John and David, thank you. I think we do have time for a couple questions that have come in from the audience. One is just actually not, it's more of a comment than a question. And someone stressed the importance of considering the resiliency of food systems in future planning, especially as we go through these periods of drought. So that's an important note. John, you mentioned moving transportation to higher ground. What would it take to achieve this? And can you give examples? Maybe David, you can chime in too.
Well, it's an interesting, well, hopefully the clicking problem is solved by me taking the headphones off. Yeah, so it's an interesting challenge because, you know, our rail infrastructure, which runs along the coast, interacts with, you know, the floodplain, the coastal floodplain in many respects, in many areas. And so in some cases, it may just be a strategic decision by, you know, the region and by the state to do what we have to do, invest in infrastructure that protects those assets, you know, because it's just too important. It's too much a part of the state's long-term strategy. I think in terms of other transportation systems, I think we're thinking about resilience corridors in terms of identifying roads, identifying high ground within communities, and really kind of, you know, the resilience corridor, which was developed by Alex Felsen, and I think Dave, you were involved in some of that too a long time ago. Really thinking about, in the short term, the resilience corridor is an egress route that, by its nature being high ground, is a way for communities to evacuate during storms. But then over time, the resilience corridor can be a way to shift development from the low-lying patches along the coast to high ground ridge lines, which are also along the coast, but which may, you know, be a site for development in the future. So Dave, I don't know if you want to chime in there.
No, John, you've covered what I was going to say, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I feel like right now, a lot of the towns, all of us are really flexing our muscles and learning how to elevate roads and do some of what you're talking about on a small scale, and we're ready to move into doing that at a more regional level.
Okay, we have just one more. I'll shorten it a little bit. What are the advantages? Can you name maybe one, how about, instead of multiple, one advantage and disadvantage to identifying shared risks and opportunities at a regional scale versus a town by town scale or a municipal scale? So Dave, you want to take a first crack at that? The benefit of a regional one. If you get, we have time for one advantage and one disadvantage, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And one advantage that I think makes sense, and we recognize this working on one of the COG hazard mitigation plans, is if we highlight critical infrastructure that serves regions and that happens to be in a regional zone of shared risk, that's an added benefit. So maybe like Greater New Haven Water Pollution Control, Regional Water Authority, you know, they serve a lot of towns, they serve the region, they're a strength of the region. And to the extent that they happen to also be in a zone of shared risk, that can kind of make it be a regional zone of shared risk. So I think we have a chance to really start addressing problems that utilities and other infrastructure owners are trying to handle on their own.
Great. Okay, we don't have time for any more at this point because it is time to transition to our keynote speaker. So I want to be sure and thank both of you for providing these a good background and a foundation for kind of the rest of the day. If you're interested in hearing more from John and Dave, please join the first breakout session.